These examples we have here are only fractions though. Decimals, just line the decimal up and do whatever you need to. In order to do this though, we're going to go down the rules, do that first. Rule number one, you find a common denominator and change the fraction to an equivalent fraction so the denominators are the same. Number two, we borrow from the whole number if possible or needed. So if it's a mixed number and the fraction isn't big enough to subtract from, then we borrow from the whole number if there is one. Number three, we add or subtract the whole numbers in the numerators, whatever the sign says to do. Number four, keep the denominator the same. Remember, the denominators don't change in fractions when you're adding or subtracting. And we simplify if possible. So if that was too fast, just pause it. In example number one, we notice the denominators are the same, so I don't have to change them into any equivalent fractions. I simply add the numerators together. 9 plus 3 is 12. I keep the denominator the same. And now I need to change it into simplest form. So I change that into 1 whole and 2/10 that's left over. And I simplify that fraction again, which is 1 1/5. Question number two is the same question, except now we're using rules of integers like we learned before. The signs are different in this case, so we subtract the two numbers. 11 minus 5 is 6. Keep the denominator the same, so that's 6/12, which is equivalent to 1/2. So we're remembering the rules of integers while we're working with fractions. They already have a common denominator, and I notice it's a mixed number. 5 minus 7, I technically can't do, so I can borrow from the 3 though, and I make that a 2. Now what I'm borrowing are these 8 pieces, because now I have a whole number to borrow from. So that makes it, the numerator now, 8 more pieces added into 5 is 13/8, minus 2 and 7/8. The whole numbers give me 0, so I'm going to leave that alone. 13 minus 7 is 6/8, which is 3/4. So when needed and possible, I can borrow from the whole number and use parts of it. Number 4, I need to come up with a common denominator for those two, which is 15. So 8/15 I can leave alone. And I'm going to multiply this by 3 and 3, because the 3 times 5 will give me 15. So that makes 3/15. That's an equivalent fraction to 1/5. They're equal still. But now I've changed it into parts I can use. 8 minus 3 is 5, not 8, sorry. 5 over 15, which reduces to 1/3. Number 5, a common denominator of 4 and 2, so the smallest number they both go into is 4. I leave 3/4 alone. And 1/2, I'm going to multiply that by 2 over 2, which will give me 2/4. Now I can use it. And I remember the rules for integers. I'm going to leave the first number alone, so 3/4 stays. This becomes addition, and I flip the sign of the number after it, so this is positive 2/4. And now I add them and get 5/4. And I change that into a mixed number, 1 whole, and I have 1 part left over out of 4 still. Number 6, common denominator of 4 and 6 is 12. That's the smallest number they'll both go into. So this I'm going to multiply by 3 over 3 and get 3/12. And this one I'm going to multiply by 2 over 2, and that's 10/12. And I'm going to borrow again because I can't take the 3 minus a 10, so I make this a 7. And I borrow 12 pieces because that's 1 whole. And now I have 12 plus a 3 I have is 15/12, minus 2 and 10/12. Subtract the whole numbers is 5. Subtract the numerators is 5, and I keep the denominator the same, so it's 5 and 5/12. So we're kind of using what you learned last year about fractions and the rules of integers that we learned this year together. Number 7, at the start of a trip, a car's gas tank contains 12 gallons. That's what it started with. During the trip, we used 10 1/8. How much is left? So 12 gallons minus 10 1/8. We have no fraction here, but we can make one. We're going to borrow 1 whole, and I can make any fraction I want right here. And I'm going to use the denominator I already have here. So that's 11 and 8/8. And now I can subtract 10 1/8. So I subtract the whole numbers as 1, and the numerators is 7/8 gallons. Number 8, a fish was swimming 3.5 feet below the water surface, so that's a negative 3.5 below the surface. 4 hours later, the fish was at a depth that is 5 1/4 feet below it, so that's negative 2. What represents the position of the fish with respect to the water surface? So it's like below and above sea level. So I have negative 3 1/2. And to that, I'm going to add, because it's still going down, negative 5 1/4. Common denominator from here is 4, so it's negative 3 2/4 plus negative 5 1/4. The signs are the same here, sorry. So I add the numbers together. That's 5 and 3 is 8. Add the numerators, that's 3. Keep the denominator the same, so negative 8 3/4 feet below the surface.